record on this computer? I don't know. We'll see. If it's already recording, I guess it'll do it either not again. So anything on section 1? Okay. Number 2, timelines. You guys, I cannot stress to you how important timelines are. They are so critical. And every day counts because everything that's written into this contract are calendar days. They are not business days. So Christmas counts, Hanukkah counts. I'm just trying, any holiday counts. So if you put any kind of time frame in here at all, at any time, you start counting the day after the date that you put into the contract, and you don't miss anything. You know, I've had somebody call me after the holidays last year, and they said, but we had Christmas, we had blah blah, but it doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to work on Christmas if you don't have your timeline. So you always want to check your calendar before you put your dates and times in there. So all timelines and deadlines under this contract shall be strictly construed. Time is of the essence with regard to any and all timelines, and contract performance dates and contingencies in the contract shall commence the day following the contract acceptance date. So if we accept a contract today, the contract date that we will start counting would be tomorrow. Number 3, any questions on that?
No.
Okay, whenever you do a contract, as soon as it is accepted, please sit down and write yourself a cheat sheet of the time frame and the timelines. You do not want to miss a time, because if you do, a lot of really bad things can happen. So just make sure that you follow your timelines exactly as they should be. Number 3 is price and terms, and this is your initial offer. So the initial offer that goes here, the buyer hereby agrees to pay X number of dollars purchase price for the real estate. That's where we're starting. Okay, that's that first offer. So let's say that the house is listed at 400 and we're coming in at 390. So this is your first offer, and that will probably at some point will be negotiated. So just keep that in mind as well. So then we get into the earnest money contingency. Oh my goodness. And today's the day for me to talk to you about that. I'm going to turn on some lights. It's getting dark. That's a little better. Okay. So whenever we're talking about earnest money cannot be held for any reason, really. It says this contract is contingent upon buyer providing earnest money in the amount of, and it's whatever that you decide with your buyer to put there. I'm very careful with earnest money. I put the minimum amount in there that I can get by with, because if something happens and this earnest money gets hung up for whatever reason, let's say that they can't agree, a deal goes down, they can't agree on who gets the earnest money, that's held up for 2 years. And if it's a substantial amount of money and it's your buyer, you do not want your buyer to be on the hook for X number of dollars for 2 years, because sometimes it does get held that long. So I usually go in with enough to make it viable and, a good offer. And yet at the same time, I don't want it to be so much money that if we don't get it back, that we have a problem. So just keep that in mind. Written acknowledgement of earnest money deposit shall be provided to the listing realtor or seller in line 14 within blank calendar days. Now this shall be 3 calendar days if not specified, beginning the day following the contract acceptance date. I always keep the 3 days in there unless it's someone who's out of town or who actually cannot get to maybe the bank, or like I worked with a gal from France, she couldn't get her earnest money here for 3 weeks, so that took a little bit longer. So those are just things you might want to take into consideration, but typically within 3 calendar days we do want that money submitted to our office beginning the day following the contract acceptance date. And that goes into, typically it's going to go into the Keller Williams Seven Hills trust account. And that's usually submitted digitally. We prefer it be submitted that way. And that way we can follow it all the way through the transaction. So that's imperative that that happens. Now, I got a call last week and the agent said, well, we haven't submitted it yet because we haven't gotten through the inspections. Well, that doesn't matter. This is not contingent on anything except getting the money in the right time frame. And if it's going to be contingent upon something else, it needs to be written in as well. Any questions on that so far?
So I do have a question. You said the minimum amount. What is the amount of earnest money that you can put in there?
You know, a lot of agents just kind of go on like up 1% of the purchase price, so $300,000, $3,000. I usually would half that if I could get by with it. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be going into multiple offers, you're going to go in a little bit stronger or something if it's, you know, going to be in multiples or whatever. But I keep it as low as I can. I usually write it a little bit lower, and if they want to negotiate that and ask me for more money, they can do that. Um, you know, but less is better, I think, when you're working with the buyer. When you're working on the other side, the seller, we want more, right, to protect us. So I would say, you know, just as little as you can get by with, but not $100, not five, maybe 1,000 minimum, but not too much. But we did, one of the gals I work with did a deal for $100 last week. $100 earnest money. So it works, I guess. If written acknowledgement of earnest money is not provided in line 17 within the stated period, then seller at any time after the stated period, now this is a seller coming back, but prior to receiving the written notice of deposit, and by seller's sole option may by written notice to the selling realtor or buyer terminate this contract. So if you do not get that money in there by the time that you say you're going to be getting it in, they can cancel the contract and they can move on. So you always want to make sure that you get that in there. Now, the flip side of it is, let's say that it's supposed to be in 3 days, you get it in 5 days and they haven't called you for that money or called that money in or given you a termination, the contract continues. It doesn't stop until they say it stops or until you get the earnest money to them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions so far? No. Okay. All righty. Great. 1 second, you guys. I apologize. I just jumped out of my car, opened my computer, and here I am. So I know the contract well enough. I'm prepared with this, but I'm just totally not as prepared as I would like to be at this particular point in time. And I just have to take care of one thing.
We forgive you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a busy day at the office. Okay, so all right. So now typically, like I said, we are going to hold that earnest money at the office, at the real estate office. That's going to go into our account digitally. Lindsay will take care of it. All good. Sometimes, however, they will want to put it into a trust account with, say, a title company or, you know, something like that. So if it goes into title handles the earnest money or can handle the earnest money a little bit differently. So if you go down to, this kind of tells you about all of that, what we just talked about. But if you go down to line 36, let's start with 34. In the event that the parties do not designate an Ohio licensed real estate broker and designate another third party or the herein listed title company to hold the earnest money, the terms and conditions of this escrow shall be governed by separate third party escrow terms. Now that could be whatever they put there. So if they're going to use separate terms and that check mark is checked next to separate escrow terms are attached, you want to make sure that you read those and understand what they say. Okay, because it does not come under the same rules necessarily as we have just being a brokerage. And it also says that both buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that in the event of a dispute between the buyer and the seller, as to entitlement of the earnest money, the realtors will not make a determination as to which party is entitled to the earnest money. That's not up to us. That's going to be between the buyer and the seller. And the buyer and seller acknowledge that loss of earnest money may not be a party's sole remedy for failure to perform on the contract. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Is it pretty, I mean, does it make a lot of sense to you? I know you might not have written an offer, but is this making sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then no questions so far?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, so the balance of the purchase price shall be paid by wire transfer, certified cashier's official bank, attorney or title company trust account, check on the date of closing and subject to the terms of applicable law. All that's really saying is at the closing or just prior to closing, they're going to wire the proceeds that they need to close on the property, and it should be at the title company or whomever is closing that property at that time. Now, number 43 gets into settlement charges, and it says in addition to costs incurred in order for the seller to fulfill the terms of the contract and to provide marketable title, seller agrees to pay actual settlement charges and or other fees due at closing on behalf of the buyer. Now, this is for the buyer's benefit, including but not limited to discount points, closing costs, prepaids, and any other fees allowed by buyer's lender in an amount not to exceed X number of dollars. Now, you are not going to arbitrarily choose that. You are going to talk to that lender, and I can't say enough how important it is to talk to the lender before you're writing this offer, to make sure you have a copy of the pre-approval, to find out that they have the money to be able to bring the proceeds that they are going to need, and to find out how much they can actually use for closing costs. So you're going to need to have all of that information in order to write this offer. Any
Su-
questions on settlement charges?
Suzanne,
Yes,
I'm now home. Can you let me in so I can
there
join?
you go. I just did. Are you in? Are you in? All right.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so most deals are contingent upon financing unless it is a cash offer, and the financing contingency starts on line 47, section 4. And except as otherwise stated and agreed herein, buyer shall pay any and all fees incurred as a result of the buyer obtaining financing for the purchase. If buyer selected financing option includes a buyer rescission period, buyer shall close on that loan with sufficient time for funds to be available on the date of closing of this contract. Buyer intends to use the real estate for the following purposes. This is a really important part. As a new agent, you may not understand, or you probably actually did study it in school, owner occupied, rental, or other. And owner occupied is number one, how you're going to get good money. The best money is going to be owner occupied. If you're going to use it as a rental or something else as other, then you're probably going to have a bump in your interest rate, et cetera. And that's something that you're going to want to find out from the lender before you get involved in this. Do you have any questions on that? Have
No.
you guys talked about this before?
No.
I have experience with this. I've been a mortgage underwriter for a few years, so I'm familiar. I'm just here because it's a requirement for Keller.
Okay, well, you're a step ahead of the game then. That's great. So you could probably teach all of us something. That's good to know. So that's perfect. If it's cash in 51, the buyer's written confirmation of available funds on verifiable documentation from the funding source, which means that, you need to know where that money's coming from. And right now is a very critical time, you guys. There's a lot of fraud. We're getting a lot of things. I mean, I've been doing this a really long time, and I'm seeing things I've never seen before, especially just since the first of the year. I don't know why that's happening now, But just be very careful that if you're doing any cash deals at all, that you verify. However, you can do that to make sure that that money really exists. We're dealing with 2 fraudulent deals that have happened. They didn't close, so we're good with that, but fraud was involved in 2 deals so far this year for money that didn't exist. So fun stuff, huh? So just be careful with that. Any questions on that? No? Okay.
No.
All right. Scott, are you still with us? I'm going to wake you up. I'm probably putting you to sleep.
No, I'm here, but unfortunately, something has come up, and I think I'm going to have to here in a minute. So I might have to catch you on the next class.
Hey, no worries at all. Not at all.
I do apologize.
No, it's
I love
okay.
this, and I really appreciate your time that you've taken to teach the class, and I feel bad.
Oh, no worries at all. Not at all. So, I hope to see you soon though.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. 59 FHA USDA NVA. Brandy, you know, right? Do I need to, I don't even need, do we even need to talk about it?
I think it's good to talk for everyone else on the call. I'm just kind of just following along. It's
Yeah, well,
fine.
don't know if we've lost, let's see. Scott
I'm
stepped
still,
away.
I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
you
sorry.
are. Okay, cool.
I just put something in my mouth because from conferences. So sorry.
No worries. I'm sitting here drinking water because I was so thirsty. No worries. Okay, so FHA, USDA, and VA are separate kinds and different loans. So whenever you're getting into FHA, and VA and USDA, sometimes they have different requirements than a conventional loan. Again, I'm going to say study those, you guys, read about them because it doesn't necessarily go into great detail about how all of that happens and exists on our contracts, but they are quite different in some ways. Like VA, FHA may require some repairs, like for example, oh, Crystalline, okay, done. Hello. How are you, Crystalline?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Sorry
We're
I'm late.
talking about FHA, USDA, and VA loans, and I don't know if you've done any of those, have you?
Yes, I have.
You have, okay, so you're coming in with a little bit of experience. They can still be at fixed or adjustable rates, depending on what they're offering and what the buyer decides to use. But they may have other stipulations, and there may be certain things that can or cannot be paid for VA, say VA, or even USDA or FHA, but they've loosened up the VA quite a bit, since all the rules changed back in August. Now, line 61 is the first mortgage in the amount, when we skip that above on the conventional loan as well. But either of these could be the same. So whenever you're looking at an interest rate, typically, Randy, as a loan officer or having been in mortgages, what would you normally put there? Would you choose an actual rate or would you do prevailing?
Rate.
An actual rate, yeah, great. That's what I always do too. Most of the lenders that come in to teach us classes always say to go with the prevailing rate. The thing that scares me about that is if you get a bump in an interest rate like we did a couple of years ago and they went up really like maybe 2 points overnight, basically, it really does increase the pricing on the loan and it might price them out of their comfort zone, maybe not out of their actual money that they are eligible for, but definitely out of their comfort zone. So I always try to put a rate in there. And I always
Yeah.
try to talk to the lender to get that.
Yeah, I wasn't a loan officer. I was an
Okay,
underwriter. So when a
okay,
contract gets to me at this point, that rate has to be in there. So
okay.
the solid rate has to be in because again, I'm reviewing the docs to give an approval
Mm-hmm.
for the loan. So that rate is in there. That's something
Okay,
that I look for it has to be in there.
okay, great. But they do write them like this,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yes,
they
so
do.
I get them all the time that it's at the prevailing rate and that's like, oh, this is kind of scary, but it is what it is. So So at an interest rate at prevailing terms or not to exceed X number of percentages. I like to go back to the lender and ask them, what is the maximum rate that these people are going to have to pay? And typically that's what I would put there. For a term of not less than how many years? Most people go for a 30-year loan, but it could be 15. It could be whatever they choose it to be, but that's what you will put there. In line 63, it says buyer has been provided the FHA for your protection, get a home inspection disclosure. That is in all of our documents on .loop, and it will be in DocuSign as well if you're starting to use DocuSign. It's very important for you to get that signed because FHA does require that to be signed. I use it on every deal that I do, whether it's FHA or conventional, I don't care, because it is another protection for us because some people will decide to waive a home inspection, which is really not a smart thing to do and should not be recommended to the buyer. But that's just another form that I would typically get signed, even though it's not an FHA loan, just to protect ourselves.
That's a good
And it
practice.
also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I say that's a good practice because I'm gonna do the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we just have to really be careful always. And, with the climate that we're working in now, and it's very litigious, so we have to be very careful with everything that we do. So I kind of try to double check all those things. So it also states that I lost my spot here, just a second. When the buyer in line 64 is financing through FHA, USDA, or VA, the seller may be required to pay certain fees. Check with the buyer's lender's institution, and whole house inspection fees may be paid by the VA buyer, but must be paid outside of the closing. So the way a VA loan is done, FHA is not that difficult, I don't think. I think it's pretty kind of coincides. You probably agreed, Randy, a lot with conventional other than a couple of things, but VA's can be quite a bit different, even though they've loosened it up a little bit.
VA is a lot more complex. FHA, the biggest part with the fees will be the upfront MIP, things like that.
Yep, for
Conventional is
sure.
the easiest.
Do you guys know what the MIP is? No? Okay,
Is
it's
that
mortgage
what's your
protection.
question?
Mortgage protection insurance.
Yes.
So it can add a substantial amount per month onto your mortgage. So it's good to know what that is going in. 67 is other funding sources. So got to be really careful with this. I put any other funding source here regardless. So some people will maybe be pulling money out of a home that they already own to get the down payment. Let's say they're getting ready to buy an investment property. They may pull money out of their current home and use that as their down payment. And you need to put that here. We need to know where all that money is going to come from. They might be using a 401k to put their down payment. I would put that under other funding sources as well. Why? Because I want everybody to know where that money's coming from, that it's not, it may be cash tomorrow, that down payment, that other funding source, or whatever we're talking about here, whether it was another loan coming in from somewhere, maybe it's going to be a HELOC that could be rescinded and it needs a 3-day period to close this loan. So any other funding source should be going here, regardless of where it's coming from. And you should attach or provide within X calendar days, beginning the date following the acceptance date, any kind of information documenting that. And if the buyer fails to provide that documentation, then the seller may terminate the contract yet one more time. So put enough time in there that you would be able to get that information and provide that to the seller's agent so they can provide it to the seller. And this is really important. Anything that changes in that lender situation, in under financing timeframe under 71, if buyer fails to provide written confirmation to the seller that buyer has completed any of the requirements of the financing timeframe as set forth in subsections A through D, then that goes below, that goes all the way down to 89, 90. Then the seller at the seller's sole discretion by written notice to terminate, to buyer, terminate this contract. So long as written notice of termination is delivered to the buyer prior to receipt of that written confirmation. So you're going to have certain pulses throughout this loan that we're going to be talking about. When you get those, get them in writing from your lender, get the written confirmation of that from them, and then shoot that over to the listing agent, because otherwise there's still a lot of backup offers coming in. And let's say that I had this happen last year and the other agent was really nice to me, but we came down to the wire on the, it was a conditional approval. It was not the, clear to close or intent to proceed. It was on the conditional approval, which was due that day. And the other agent called me and she said, you know what, Susan, we've got a $15,000 more larger offer than yours. If we don't get, and my buyer was dragging her feet, and they said, if we don't get that today, they're going to pull the contract and they're going to go with the other deal. So just keep in mind that can happen. You know, we came really close to losing that deal. I think I got that about 10 o'clock at night. It goes till midnight, thank goodness, with these contracts, but it was not an easy situation because she was on the fence. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, and it got to be really kind of dicey. But when I said, oh, somebody else wants your house for $15,000 more, it changed how she felt, right? Instantly. So in 76, it says buyer financing qualification letter based upon initial credit check and preliminary information provided by the buyer stating that such qualification is or is not contingent upon the closing of a buyer's other real estate and is attached. Be very, very, very careful. I spent a week on the phone with our errors and emissions insurance company last week because is was marked. The pre-approval letter did not support that it had to be sold. And so we had to fight through that one. It was a really hard one. We almost lost that deal and it was not going to be pretty. So we did end up saving it, but it was a fight to the end for one of our agents. So be very careful when you see line 77, read it, reread it, and make sure that you know exactly what it's saying. If it does say that it is contingent upon the sale of their other real estate, make sure you have a letter that states exactly what has to happen. Okay, and then if that is the case, there is an addendum that goes with this contract upon any contingent sales. Make sure that the other agent, if they did not send it to you, that you send it back to them and say, I have to have that contingency attached, because it tells them exactly what's going to happen. If you don't have that, you can end up in a mess. Okay, so if you run across that, you need help, you guys always call me. I'm available. I'm happy to help. But just make sure that we don't get to a situation with that. And we have to be very, very careful with 76, 77, and 78. Any questions on that? We haven't seen many contingent sales lately because we've been in such a hot market that everybody just comes in, they want to close quickly. They're not going to be contingent upon the sale of their property that they already own. Most times not. But we are starting to see them again. And most agents have never seen them before, so they really don't know what to do with them. So whenever you are writing this as a buyer's agent, make sure that you have the proper documentation. If you happen to have a listing and you're getting that offer, make sure you have the proper documentation from the other agent. Any questions on that? Because that's kind of a big deal. No? You guys are quiet. All right. So number 79 is buyer shall complete a loan application, which shall include providing selected lender with the intent to proceed. And that includes them paying for the appraisal. People like to not pay for that appraisal until they get through inspections a lot of times, but this all needs to be coincided so that everything kind of happens at the same time. So within blank calendar days, beginning the day following the contract acceptance date, they will make a diligent effort to get their financing and to get that intent to proceed letter. The intent to proceed letter is a termination point. So if you do not have that intent to proceed letter on the date that you're supposed to have it, I'm going to die. I've got to plug in. Then the seller can cancel the contract and you can lose the whole deal. 1 second, you guys, I got to plug in. I do not want to lose you, and it is getting down to the wire on my battery. Any questions so far, or anything you need to talk about or want to talk about at this point as I'm plugging in?
No.
Okay, all right.
Hey, I came in late. I know I've done this with you. I just want to
Yes,
refresh myself. Where can I find this recording after this is over?
Crystalline, if I knew, I would tell you. I
Okay.
don't. It says it is being recorded, and I will check with Peyton tomorrow, okay? And
Okay.
try to get
Thank
that out.
you.
I'll try to put that information out. I don't really know where they're being held. We talked about that this morning in our huddle and this morning at 8:30, and I'm just not sure where they are, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
And it's probably not a bad thing for me because I hate to watch myself and I hate to hear myself. So better you guys watch it than me, but I will find out where they are. I'm sorry. I wish I knew. I think I'll start my own page so it's easier for me to watch those and to keep up with them. So we've talked about the financing qualification, getting through conditional approval, and our intent to proceed. Conditional approval is, again, let me go back to the intent to proceed is in line 79. When you jump down to 83, that's your conditional approval, and it has been obtained within blank calendar days beginning the day following the contract acceptance date. Conditional approval means that the loan has been underwritten. Brandy, you want to tell us a little bit about what that really means? No? Okay. Conditional approval means that
I'm
basically,
sorry, I'm back. I'm sorry.
ah, there you are.
I-
Hi.
My son is in the other room studying. I had to help him with something. I apologize.
Hey, three
Go
boys, I
ahead.
get
What
it.
were you saying? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just said conditional approval. Do you have any words for us on that?
Conditional approval means that there's more conditions that the underwriter has determined that needs to be met before you receive a final approval. So that
Okay.
could mean recent pay stubs, it can mean recent tax returns, it can mean a number of things. So a conditional approval just means the loan does not receive the final approval, all conditions have been met.
Great. Thank you for that. And it could be anything, right? It could be
Correct.
like you said, employment. It could be somebody might have had a bankruptcy that they had to prove that has been X number of
Exactly.
period of
Yep.
time. So that's kind of a big deal, right? Whenever you ask about the conditional approval.
Yes, it is a big deal. Most it's standard when you get the pre-approval that it's conditioned out for your standard conditions, but
Right.
there's some conditions that we set prior to closing, which means we may not see it until the day before closing or whatever, but it just depends on what the condition is that needs to be met before we could give a final approval.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for that. It's so nice having you here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. I really like the insight that you're bringing. It really does help. So after that, then we're going to get written notification to seller that loan approval or clear to close. Is that magic? Music to my ears. CGC. When I get that, I am so happy. That means we're going to closing. And has been obtained with or waived within blank calendar days prior to the date of closing. I normally put 3 days in there. What would you recommend, Brandy? Keep bringing you back, don't I? You're
Which
trying to
number?
do homework.
I'm sorry. Which number are
That's
you
all
on? I'm
right.
sorry. What's your question?
Oh, for the clear to close, X number of days prior to closing. I usually do 3 days.
Which number are you on?
Number 83 or 88, 89, lines 88 and 89. No, clear to close and then how many calendar days? I usually just do 3.
3.
But let's pop down to 90. That the buyer shall make a diligent effort to obtain financing and shall provide all lender requested documents to the lender in a timely manner. And the buyer is relying on buyer's own understanding of financing to be obtained and processes required by a lender as well as the legal and tax consequences thereof, if any. They're signing off that they know that. They probably don't know that. Would be my guess. Most people don't know what they're signing off with that. So, go over it with them as much as you can and tell them to please talk to their lender and their title company to make sure that anything that pops up, that they get information on that as well. Now, most properties are going to have an appraisal contingency, and this talks about the appraisal and the contingency. The best thing that I can say about this is that whenever I'm talking about appraisals, that if an appraisal comes in low, one of three things happens. You renegotiate the contract, right? You bring money to closing, or you walk away. Any other ideas on that? Because people get nervous sometimes. Of what if it doesn't appraise? Well, there are options. We try to renegotiate the contract first. So whenever you do have the appraisal, this section is confusing, and I'll tell you why. It talks about that there will be an appraisal, and the appraisal runs at the same time frame as all of the conditions that are listed above in the financing. However, if you go down to line 98, in the event of purchase via cash or other funding sources within blank calendar days, beginning the day following the contract acceptance date, that's where, or in the event of conventional FHA, yada, 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 the time frame set forth in section 4 above for obtaining a loan approval will be the same as the appraisal contingency period. If buyer does not deliver written notice to the listing realtor, listing realtor seller that buyer is terminating the contract prior to the expiration of the appraisal contingency period, then buyer's option to terminate this contract due to appraised value shall be deemed waived. So if you're going to do if you're doing cash, you just need to identify that you are doing an appraisal if you choose to do one. Most people buying cash don't. But you do need to identify that. And you do need to get back to them if there's an issue with the appraisal to either renegotiate that or walk away from the deal. If you don't do that within that time frame, you're going to go ahead and the buyer's going to buy the house. Or something else will happen. Number 6 is inclusions and exclusions of sale. I'm not going to read all of this to you in the essence of time and my voice. But inclusions and exclusions of sale, please read this. Have you read this, guys? You have? I love
Yes.
that. Bravo. That's great. It's such boring reading. Who wants to read it, right? But we have to know what it says. But the one things I do want to point out here is most of it's normal and typical, and you're going to read through what's included. Basically, if it's attached, it's going to stay. If it's personal property, it won't typically. But if you hop down to number 117, it starts here with like an underground fencing transmitter and receiver collars. Now, if you got dogs and you've got receiver collars keeping them in the yard, that's something that should stay. But beyond that, parking space numbers. So this goes more towards if you're selling condos or like a community where maybe it would be condominiums or something like that. You may have parking space numbers and you may have storage unit numbers, and those do need to be written in here. It's really critical that if you don't know what those numbers are, that you find out from the agent that's the listing agent on those and make sure that they are written in. Some are deeded, some are not. And you also need to find out that if it's a parking spot, is it deeded or is it not deeded? They may have access to it, but they may not own it. Something to keep in mind and questions to ask whenever you're selling condos. And then the following appliances shall also be included. This is really important. I had 2 agents this past year buy major refrigerators, big ones, expensive, almost $4,000. Because also included are the ranges, ovens, microwaves, refrigerators, dishwashers, garbage disposers, and trash compactors. Now, here's what gets you here. Whenever you list the property, whenever the listing agent lists the property, they may say, oh, well, we're not going to add the refrigerator. And MLS, guess what? They may not add the refrigerator in MLS. But if you send them this offer, this contract, and they accept it as is, and it says the refrigerator stays, even though MLS says it doesn't, guess what? It stays.
It stays.
It stays, absolutely. Whatever is in this contract, whatever is written in this contract, regardless of what that MLS sheet says, this is your contract and this is what stands. Consequently, 2 refrigerators were purchased last year. That I know of. I don't know how many more, but 2. And one was very expensive. And the agent ended up purchasing it for her client because it was not picked up from MLS to contract. So just make sure that you go through these specifically on every single detail and make sure that everything matches to MLS if it should. As the buyer's agent, though, you can ask for the refrigerator, even though it's not listed in MLS. And if they sign off on this, you're going to get the fridge or you're going to fight over it after the closing, one of the two. There are some things that are considered leased in the property, and that starts on lines 120, 21, and 22. And that would be maybe they've got here a water softener security system, propane tanks. You run into that in the country. Not only the propane tank itself is at least, but how much propane is propane gas? It's gas, right? How much gas is actually in that tank? And are they going to get reimbursed for it at the date of closing on how much was left in there? We just did one of those. So the buyer had to pay money for the gas that was left, which is really interesting. So that's something to consider. Satellite dishes, we don't see too much anymore, and satellite dish components, not so much anymore, but it could still happen. The following items, which are no additional value to the real estate, are specifically included with the real estate. And this is where you could add some things in that the buyer wants to ask for. I recommend not ever adding anything in like furniture, lawnmowers, that kind of thing, because guess what? It will screw up a deal faster than anything else. You want a deal not to come together? And I had a deal go down over to Walmart, I think. Guys, just chairs. They wanted them left in the kitchen. And the seller said no, and the buyer got mad. It was just ego at that point, and they walked away. So try not to put those kinds of things into your contracts. The following items are specifically excluded from the real estate. What might that be? Any ideas? It could really be anything. So if it's something, again, that excuse me, is listed in MLS that is not staying, you may write it in here. I had a seller down in OTR and she had this really special chandelier that everyone didn't like. No one really wanted it anyway. But she specifically excluded it from the real estate, and that was written in MLS. So whenever the offer came in, it was not written in on 6B. So we had to go back and make that a negotiating tool and take it out because she was not going to leave that. So it was going to be specifically excluded. Normally, if they see it written in MLS is not staying, they will typically write it in, but sometimes it becomes a bone of contention, as do say cameras, media equipment, those kinds of things. A lot of people want to take them and a lot of buyers want to keep them. Oh gosh, terms of broker compensation. How many of you were around in August when everything changed? Crystal, and you were, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, I thought so. But Brandy, I don't know if you were.
I was not.
I was not either.
Okay. All right. So it's all new to us. It's not new to you. So it's going to be easy for you because you're not going to know any different. But the terms of broker compensation, fees, and commissions are not set by law, are fully negotiable, and may be paid by the seller, the buyer, the landlord, the tenant, or a third party, or by sharing or splitting, excuse me, the fees and commissions between the brokers. So buyer brokerage. Buyer represents and warrants that buyer is represented by, and that would be Keller Williams Seven Hills, and the following licensed salesperson affiliated with the buyer brokerage. Let's just pretend it's Brandy. So we would put Brandy's name there. Fill in none if buyer is not represented by any brokerage and or licensed salesperson. And we are seeing that. This could happen. Let's say you have a listing. Let's say that, Crystalline goes to Brandy's open house and decides she wants to buy the house, but she does not want to be represented because she doesn't want to pay any money. So, or she might want to pay some money. And maybe Randy's going to ask her for money to be paid because she's going to be doing the deal and writing both sides. So that's where that would be really important. But some people are representing themselves. B is buyer representation agreement. The buyer confirms, you guys, this is so important because they are fining us for this. It's $1,000 on the first offense if you don't fill this in. And MLS by the authority of the Department of Justice, it's not MLS, they don't really care about this, but it's part of what they have to do now. They are doing spot checks on these. So buyer confirms that buyer has or has not signed a buyer representation agreement with the buyer brokerage, setting forth the terms and the amount of compensation due from buyer to buyer brokerage in connection with the purchase. We got somebody coming, April. In connection with the purchase of the deal. Now, this is very important. The first thing you have to do when you're working with the buyer is when you go out with them, before you ever show them a house, what do you have to do?
They have to sign
What?
they have to sign the buyer brokerage agreement.
They do. Crystalline, thank you. Did you guys know that?
Yes.
Okay. Before you ever show them a house, you cannot walk through that door with them without having that signed. And hi, April. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. And they are spot checking these, and there are fines going out for these. So if you do a deal and they close it and they ask to see this, the documentation to this, and it's not the way it's supposed to be, they will come. We will get the letter. We have gotten them. Okay, so be very, very careful with that. You want to make sure that you always get those signatures before you walk through the door with them. If not, things can happen. So on this, under section, so if you have or have not, if you're going to check has not, you're not going to show them the house, okay? Because you can't take them through the house. And C is the buyer brokerage compensation. Buyer and seller agree that buyer brokerage fees and expenses incurred, we already said this once in the contract earlier, in connection with the buyer's purchase of the real estate, buyer's brokerage fee shall be paid at closing as follows. And remember, they're always negotiable. Seller agrees to pay blank or blank of the purchase price to the buyer brokerage at closing. That's where we're asking for our compensation, and we're asking for it to be coming from the seller right there. Typically, what am I going to ask for? I'm going to ask for my 3%. Are they going to give it to me? They may not want to, and that might be a negotiation tool. Then it goes on in line 145 that buyer shall pay all remaining buyer brokerage fees due from buyer under the buyer representation agreement. All buyer brokerage fees due under the buyer representation agreement, less any agreed to be paid at closing by seller. So whatever you put on that buyer agreement, the buyer representation agreement, is what you're going to have to live by. So if you say put in that you're only going to charge the buyer 2%, and yet the seller is willing to pay you 3%, how much money can you take? 2 or 3?
Two.
Only 2. It has to be whatever is written in that buyer broker agreement, and it cannot go higher. So be very careful when you're writing those not to shortchange yourself. Other terms for payment of compensation. This is something that you might want to, if you're not getting your money from one place or the other, maybe the buyer is going to pay all of it. Maybe the buyer is going back to their lender, and the lender is going to put it into the closing costs, and the money is going to be coming from the closing costs. It can come from just about anywhere, but we just have to define where that money is coming from and how much, because otherwise we can shortchange ourselves and we won't get our full amount of money. Any questions on that?
No.
You guys are pretty good with it because it's new. It was new to all of the agents that have been around for a while, but the newer agents aren't, not having to deal with it too much because it's all exactly what you're learning right now. So if you go on to 160 in section 8, certificate of ownership, this is just the seller is saying that they own everything that they're transferring to you. It's just their promise or guarantee that whatever they are selling you, that they own it and they can sell it to you, except as listed in section 23. And they also represent that they're signing this contract constitute all the owners of the title to the real property and all items as listed in section 6, together with the respective spouses, if applicable. Now, in Ohio, all sellers have to sign. So if there's a husband and wife, even if they're in the process of a divorce, both parties, it takes 2 to buy and 1 to sell. So I'm sorry, 1 to buy and 2 to sell. I gave you that wrong. So whenever you're getting this back, if there's a seller, all sellers have to sign. Okay, otherwise you're not going to be able to close the deal. Any questions on that? But 1 buyer, if you can buy, it's fine. 1 buyer can buy. Seller certification, and this goes into certification of the real estate, and you'll want to do your own research on this. A lot of this may be listed in the property disclosure, the disclosure property condition that's attached in your documents on MLS. If it's not there, you want to go back and ask the other agent what the deal is with it. Is it in a historic district? Sometimes it can be, and you're just not sure about it. So I would go back and ask them before I fill this out. If you go ahead and fill it out and it's wrong, it's up to them to change it and make it the way it's supposed to be. But I wouldn't want to put anything in here incorrectly and submit the offer. So is it in a historic district? Is it subject to a lease? These are all really important things because leases go with the land. Is not subject to an agreement pertaining to joint maintenance. Some properties do have joint maintenance driveways, or maybe there's a section of land that both people are taking care of. Is it in a floodplain? Really important because flood insurance has gone extremely high. So you want to check into that too. On line 172 is not subject to a municipal pre-sale inspection disclosure and or certificate or certification of occupancy. If the real estate is located in a jurisdiction requiring housing inspection before transfer, seller shall be responsible for completing and submitting the necessary application and will furnish to buyer a copy of the resulting unconditional certificate on or before the date of closing. The thing about Cincinnati is they do condemnations. So if you're selling a house that is in an area maybe that is, and the house is not, it could be $1,000, it could be $30,000, but make sure that it's not in a condemnation state situation because otherwise that can come back on you after the sale. So be very careful with those things. Ask the other agent. They're not always 100% informed. So sometimes you're going to have to go do your own due diligence on these items and make sure that you know what you're writing in here is correct. Is it subject to any pending orders of any public authority? Again, this is something that should be disclosed either on the condition of property or the other agent should be telling you this, and it should be an MLS, but it isn't always. So sometimes there'll be orders that have been given to the seller and the seller just doesn't bother to tell anybody. So what do you do if it's a property that could be in question? I guess I would go to the city and do my due diligence on it, maybe do some investigation and try to figure out where it is in process. Is it okay, or is it being condemned and we just don't know about it yet? 176 is not or is subject to pending orders of any public authority. We said that. 178 has or has not had work or improvement constructed that may result in future assessments. If affirmative, describe. This happens with condominiums a lot. It could even be a sidewalk in front of a house, but especially with condos, if there's any particular situation where maybe they are looking at, say, a new roof and it has going to be an assessment for every owner of the properties there, that's kind of a big deal. You need to try to figure that out prior to. And the best place to find that is by going back, because in here, whenever you're writing an offer on a condo, it's going to tell you to look at the minutes of their meetings That's usually where it comes out. It usually comes out when they're fighting about money in the meetings. It's not usually anyplace else. So whenever you're selling a condo, you need to get your hands on those minutes because that's going to tell you all the things that have been happening with those condos. Let's see, work construed, notices from public agency with respect to condemnation. 183, no toxic, explosive, or other hazardous substances have been stored, disposed of, concealed within, or released on or from the real estate. And or other adverse environmental conditions exist within the boundaries of the real estate. If yes, describe. If the house has been a meth house and it's been identified as that, it needs to be disclosed. Is not subject to encroachments, shared driveways, party walls. We had a $2 million house go down about 3 months ago because of an encroachment that was not given to us. They didn't know. The buyers didn't know. Sellers knew, but there was an encroachment in the backyard. It was a fence that ran right through the middle of the backyard. And it became a really big deal. And the deal ended up just crashing and burning. So anything that could be an encroachment, always ask and investigate that. K is really important. If you're selling any properties that are in OTR, Price Hill, areas where they're offering maybe East Walnut Hills, where they're offering tax abatements or homestead exemptions, and the other agent tells you that, make sure you don't do anything with those until you get something in writing from them stating exactly what that tax abatement is, if it has been applied for, if it's been approved or not, because it can turn into a really big deal if that work has not been done. You do not want to close and find out that tax abatement never went into position and that the buyer who's thinking they're only going to be spending $3,000 a year for taxes end up spending $30,000 a year for taxes. So just be very careful with those items.
Would that be in the MLS? Or would you just need to ask the listing agent that?
Well, may I tell you a story?
Uh-huh.
We have an agent that sold one and she had spoken to the listing agent who has sold a ton of properties with tax abatements. He is very well versed with a different company, not with us. Oh yeah, it's all done already. And so he gave her enough information that it looked like everything had been completed. When they closed on the property and they went to get the tax abatement, it had never been approved. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that is crazy. And it got ugly, needless to say. I don't know that it's totally been worked out yet. I know that they were still trying to get the tax abatement in place, but they had missed the timeline and the taxes had increased substantially over what they thought they were going to be paying. So a lot of times we can ask the other agent and make notes of all of these things that you find out from them so that you eliminate a lot of your liability. But it still falls a lot of due diligence on us to go investigate those things and make sure, especially with tax abatements, especially with encroachments, especially with homestead exemptions. Those are all things that we probably just need, get in our car, go to the courthouse or wherever we need to go and find out what really is happening with us. Because otherwise it could create really big issues.
But can't you go to the tax website, the county tax website and pull that information?
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, if it's in the
Okay.
process of happening and it has not happened yet, if it's an application that's gone in, it's not going to show there yet. So,
Okay.
okay. It's another thing. It's just a lot of extra due diligence, but remember, we make a lot of money for what we do. And if it takes an extra few hours to protect our clients and us, we really need to do that because it's not always as clear as we think it should be. Especially with homeowners associations in 195, homeowner association condos, declarations, bylaws, and articles. As I had mentioned to you before, whenever you are writing this, it talks to you about all the different things you need to get from the homeowners association. Don't deviate from that. If you call the listing agent and you tell them that you want to know if there's any violations, if there's any outstanding assessments, if there's any potential assessments, and they say, no. That's great. And I need something in writing from the association stating that because we had a seller about 6 months ago pay $12,000 to the buyer after closing
Hmm.
because he wasn't aware of the assessment. So the buyer came back and the seller did not want to go to court on the situation, so he just wrote a check for 12 grand. So things do slip through. So as a buyer's agent, you want to ask all those questions. And being newer agents, and a lot of times the older, when I say older, I mean more, not even more experienced, because necessarily their experience isn't that great necessarily, but they may just say, oh, yeah. And because they've been in the business for 5 years and you've been in the business for 5 minutes, you may take their word for it. Do not do that because you can't trust anything you hear. You have to have it in writing because if you go to court, always pretend that every offer you write could end up in front of a judge. If it does, and you do not have those right answers, you do not want to be liable for this stuff. So just ask all the right questions and pretend that everything you write could end up in front of a judge and just ask yourself, if it did, could I win? And if it's an assessment that you didn't know about, what happens? I don't know. We don't know what the judge would say. Maybe you'd be okay, maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. 212, line 212, it talks about getting your documents in X number of calendar days. And then the buyer shall have the right to review those documents. And this goes back to all of the documents, everything that they can take and review and look at. And then they have X number of calendar days to approve those. Any questions on this?
No.
Condos are complicated. If you've never written an offer on a condo, the first time you do it, I highly recommend that you find somebody in the office to help you that is familiar with writing condominium offers, because I think they're very difficult to write the right way. And if something happens later, and it happens a lot with condominiums, you can really be liable for a lot of stuff. We don't want that to happen. So please find somebody to help you with that. Any questions, you're always welcome to call me. Okay. 236 maintenance. It says that the maintenance will be taken care of on that property up to the date of the actual closing. And if it's post occupancy after closing, it will be left in the same condition that the buyers purchased it. Basically is what all of this says, except, and if there's any exceptions, this is where it would be written. Home warranty, always fill this in, you guys, for your E&O insurance. Even if your people do not want a warranty, go ahead and write this in here, or put it in that they're waiving it. They either select or they don't select, one of the two. And if they select it, may put it in, that's great. If they're not selecting, that's okay as well. But put it in here because it would help indemnify you with your E&O insurance if something would happen later. Property disclosure form has or has not been received. It's the Ohio Residential Property Disclosure Form. And it's required by law for the seller to fill it out, except in a couple of instances. If it's a probate, they don't have to fill it out. That's one of them. It's if it's been a government acquired property or it's been condemned, it does not have to be filled out. So otherwise, if it's not filled out, you want to make sure that it is. This is the buyer's offsite acknowledgement. This is saying that the buyer acknowledges that the buyer has conducted all of their own investigations in relation to municipalities, zoning, school districts, use of real estate conditions outside of the boundaries, including but not limited to, and this is really important, crime statistics, registration of sex offenders, noise levels, etc. Now, you are not going to give them that information, but you can tell them where to get it. For sex offenders, the sheriff's department, there's, just Google those sites. We actually have them on a form that is it may even be at the very end of this one or at the end of the property disclosure. But you want to make sure that they have that information and encourage them to do their own due diligence on that. You do not want to say, oh yeah, this is a really safe area. We don't know what's safe to me. I live in Avondale. I mean, stuff happens here all the time. I'm not threatened by it. I'm perfectly safe here, but you might not feel the same way. So what would be safe to me might not feel safe to you. So, or to any buyers. So let them do their own investigations on those things. Any questions on that so far?
Oh.
You guys are so quiet. Do we need to get up and like do some calisthenics or something? Get moving here just in time to go to bed, right?
Mhm.
270, the buyer at the buyer's expense has the option to have the real estate inspected by Ohio licensed home inspectors. And that goes into the situation here where they're going to hire an inspector. You're going to give them 3 names of inspectors and they are going to make their own choices. Don't say, oh, my favorite inspector is blah, blah, blah. No, here are 3 names. I want you to call them. I want you to interview them. You might like one more than the other. I want you to choose whoever you're going to feel the most comfortable with. That way you reduce your liability with that as well. And the buyer shall be responsible for any damage to the real estate caused by buyer or buyer's inspectors or contractors, which repairs shall be completed in a timely and workmanlike manner at the buyer's expense. Buyers understand in 282 and agrees that the inspection report are not to be considered a list of required repairs and or corrections to the real estate. You guys, I highly encourage you prior to showing any houses that you actually do a buyer consult with any buyer that you're working with. And one of the things you're going to talk to them about is just because it shows up on an inspection report does not mean that it's something you need to ask for a repair. Things that should be repaired, yeah, there's going to be things that might have to be repaired. But if it's minor, if it's a maintenance item, I'm going to prepare my buyers for that before we ever even look at houses. You know, you're going to have all kinds of things come back on those reports. Obviously, we're going to ask for repairs to health and safety issues, or actually anything you really want to ask to have to be repaired. But the thing is, we don't want to go in and ask for little minute things that are just maintenance items. Say, a cover plate on maybe an electrical outlet or something. It may or may not be something that you would have to use to do. It also says in 288 that you have or have not received the seller's disclosure of any lead-based paint. After the year of 78, they were not using lead-based paint, so after anything built after 78, you do not have to worry about that. But you do need to send them anything built prior to 78 that protect your family from lead in your home. And there is a form that goes along with that so that you would get that signed. Buyer has the right to waive the right to conduct inspections. A buyer elects to conduct limited inspection. Do not use this. People write this thinking that they can go in and do the buyer elects to conduct limited inspections. If it's an investor and they only want to look for termites, that's okay. But if it's a normal buyer, just a normal buyer coming in, they probably don't want to do number 294. They want to jump down and do the full inspection of the real estate. And you want to encourage them to do that, because if they go in and they don't do the full inspection and something happens, it can be a real problem. We sold a house over in Kentucky to a guy. This has been about 10 years ago. He said, oh no, this house is beautiful. And it had been completely redone. And he refused to do the inspection. He just did not want to spend the extra few $100. So the day he moved in, the toilet on the second floor fell to the first floor. It really happened. I'm not kidding you.
First floor?
So
Wow.
things happen. You just don't know when or what that is going to be. So when he refused to do the inspection, the agent that was working for me said, I'm really not comfortable with this. I said, get so many waivers signed that no matter what happens, he can't sue us and come back. And the house looked great. It wasn't like we had any idea that there was any issues with it. And he did sign off all these waivers and blah, 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 and hold harmless all these things. And lo and behold, it was the time we really did need them. We didn't even know we were going to need them. So whenever you're looking at 304, buyer shall have a period of X number of days to do the inspection period. Normally right now I'm using 7 days. You can use whatever you want. That's up to you and when you can get somebody in to do the inspection. And to provide the seller a signed written request for seller to correct. This is the key here, you guys. Any material conditions or matters adversely affecting the real estate, which is going to go into the defect notice. And the defect notice shall identify the conditions to which buyer is requesting correction by the seller and shall include the relevant portions of the inspection report, which coincides with that. So you're going to send that over. They also sign off here that buyer agrees that minor routine maintenance and cosmetic items are not to be considered material, and buyer may not object to those in the defect notice. So you're going to tell them this the first time you meet with them. We're not going to go in and ask for all the little stuff that needs to be done. We're only looking for the bigger stuff, the things that really are going to need to be completed. And if something does come back that they do want to have done, again, these timelines here are critical. Whatever you write in here, you are going to have to live by. And you do have to send a defect notice if you want to try to walk away, unless you put other language somewhere in this offer or on an addendum stating that you reserve the right to walk away if they are not happy with the condition of the property after they've read the inspection report. Very important. Because otherwise you've got to go through giving them the defect notice, seeing that they're going to make the repairs. If they say they're not going to make the repairs, you can walk away from the deal. If they say they're going to make the repairs, then you may have to stay in the deal. When you read this thoroughly, and I want you guys to take, this is the most critical point of this entire contract. I would say it's where most of the problems arise, is with what happens during that inspection period and after with the defect notice. So make sure that this entire section, you are very, very aware of exactly what it says. Okay. So I'm going to implore you to read this and read it again and read it again, because what we think it says, it may not say. If you go down for the purposes of subsection D, they talk about being able to walk away for only certain things. And notwithstanding the foregoing, they're saying that you can walk away if there's lead-based paint that you didn't know about, if there's any hazardous materials that you did not know about, and they do not wish to provide a defect notice to the seller, then they can go ahead and just not do the defect notice and try to get out of the contract. But the money's still up for grabs. It doesn't necessarily mean that they would get their earnest money back. That's why when I first started saying, when you're taking your earnest money, take the minimum amount that you have to in case they would happen to lose it. And if they're going to lose earnest money, this is probably where it would happen. Property survey is not something that most people do too much anymore. There was a time that whenever we did any kind of a sale on any kind of real estate, they would do a survey and make sure that the house was situated exactly where it was supposed to be. Not doing that so much anymore. They might just do a site survey or no survey, but high recommendation is that if you are selling any kind of substantial land other than a lot, always give them the offer to do their survey, which they would do on their own. But if you're doing any kind of land in the country, if you're doing any kind of acreage at all, I would highly recommend doing a survey. Because otherwise, a lot of times, unless it's been staked or penned, you do not know what they're buying, and they don't know what they're buying. Property insurance verification contingency, you have 14 days for them to get a bid on their insurance and to decide whether that insurance is going to work for them or not. And that goes into the details here in number 17. Number 18 is the seller will cooperate with the buyer to make sure that they are going to open that home for inspections, etc., during reasonable periods of time so that they can come in and do their due diligence, and that we can as realtors as well. Any other contingencies or agreements would be written in section 19. That could be anything. It might be identify where the septic tank is in the field. It could be make sure that we get a copy of all the tax abatement information. So any other contingencies would go here. It could also state that if the inspections don't satisfy the buyer, that the buyer reserves the right to cancel this contract, walk away, and get their earnest money back. So there's anything that you're not going to put anywhere else in this contract would go under other contingencies or agreements. Title insurance, highly recommend that your buyers buy title insurance. Don't get into great detail with that with them, because that's not what we do. We don't sell it. We recommend it. And we would let the title company explain to them why it is very important for them to have it. So this is where they would either, number one, does not select an owner's title insurance policy at the time. Or number two, they do select a title insurance policy, and whether the buyer is going to pay for it, whether the seller is going to pay for it, or whether the seller shall pay for the whole thing or just contribute towards it in the amount of $300. And so we talked about that a little bit. Prorations of real estate taxes and assessments. Taxes will be prorated. And they're going to be divided between the time that the seller owns the property and the time that the buyer is going to be buying the property, and that money is going to be divided. Now, you've got this little box here in 418. That's not the one I'm talking about. But it does say that, and we'll talk about 418, if checked, buyer hereby states that the buyer will use real estate for agricultural purposes. Typically, you're not going to have that because we're mostly city girls selling in the city. But if you're selling in the country, that could come into play. Again, it talks about how the tax prorations will be divided. And 426 is really important. Short proration typically is going to be a benefit to the seller, and buyers get really upset by that. So you want to make sure that that's probably not how we typically do it. I don't know that I've ever checked that with any house I've ever sold. And we have a lawsuit probably waiting to happen from a realtor that just did that. So be very careful if you ever decide to use that box. Make sure exactly what it means financially to the buyer before you would check it, or if you're a listing agent, before you would accept it. 431 talks about assessments, and again, any assessments that might be coming up. They've talked about it. This is the third time in this contract we've discussed it. So make sure that if there are any assessments that you know where they are, what they are, and what they mean. New construction. Again, read through this, make sure that you know that the new construction that you're going to be working with, closing dates can vary a lot, and that can create some sorts of situations in terms of what the buyer might need to bring to closing, etc. And make sure how that's going to work. Newly construction residences may not have the same tax implications that an existing house has. New construction, whenever it's built, the taxes are basically just based on the land. So they need to make sure, the buyers and you as their agent need to make sure that there's going to be enough money put away for them to pay their taxes at the end of that first tax year. If it's left just based on the land cost, the taxes, there's not going to be enough money held in escrow for them to pay their taxes. So that's one thing that you definitely want to keep into mind whenever you're talking to your buyers about that. Then it goes into other prorations, like homeowner condominium association assessments, that could come up. There are sometimes capital investments that go into, say, a new condominium. I just sold one with Fisher, and the people are going to have to, it's not much, but it's still about $400 that they have to pay before at the closing out of their pockets, because that's their capital investment in that association. B's rents and operating expenses. The real estate is related to tenants. So whenever you are selling a property that is lived in by tenants, again, it's a different animal. You might want to get help with that if you've never written that kind of a deal, because there will be monies that will be exchanged at closing that will be prorated between the buyer and the seller. And that could be deposits on leases, etc. A conveyance and closing. And this goes into all of the closing services that the title company is going to identify and give to them at closing, and the things that they are going to be discovering and passing on to the buyers as to what the title exam would cover, that kind of thing. Read this, know that you understand it. If you don't understand it, study it. AI is our new best friend, you guys. So if you read through this stuff and you're not exactly sure what you're reading, throw it in AI and see what AI has to say about it. I do it every day. So make sure that, you know what it is that you're selling in these contracts because it's really important to you and to your sellers or your buyers. 471, the date of closing shall be when? Typically, it's going to be a minimum of 30 days. If it's a loan, 30 to 45 days. Check with the lender. Make sure that the lender is going to be able to get that loan done for you and close within the period of time that we want it to close. And only they can answer that for you. Any questions on that?
And we can put 30 to 45 days in that, can't we? I've usually just counted and put the actual date.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, it can come in late, Crystalline. So I would say I always call the lender and say, my clients want to close at the end of the next month. So that would be basically 45 days, say we were going to close end of March. But they may want to close the second week of March because they need to move really quickly. Can we do that? You're only going to know that if you talk to the lender and the lender makes the commitment to you that they can do that. So I would always call and check that closing date with them before I put it in there.
But yeah, I understand that part, but can we put like 30 to 45 days, or do you recommend putting, okay, gotcha. All right.
That's not a valid contract. If you put 30 to 45 days, no, it's not going to stand up in court. So you have to actually have a drop dead date for your closing date. I think that's what you're asking me, right?
Yeah, our Kentucky contract, you could put 30 to 45. So I put the regular date. I just wanted to ask if
Crystalline,
okay.
and
They've
are you in
allowed that to
Louisville?
happen in, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you
I was
cannot do
listening to
that.
what Crystal is about them writing 30 to 45 days in Kentucky. I'm just interested on who the lenders are that's doing these loans because a closing date should always be in there. And
It's
if
a
it
drop dead date.
changes, you need
It
to do
has
an
to be in
addendum to
there.
the contract if it changes. That's like that's like a standard really with lending. So I don't know how they are allowing something to come through with 30 to 40 days written in there for that date. I mean, that's a no.
Crystalline, don't you work out of Louisville?
Yeah, that's how we do that's how our
Yeah,
contracts are here.
Brandy, their contracts are a little bit different, which
Yeah.
is
But even with the
crazy.
contracts, I'm saying as far as with the lender should not be accepting that. That's like an
Do they accept
underwriting red
those?
flag. The lender should not be allowing that.
I
Yeah,
agree with you.
that's how they do it. Yeah.
I agree with you 100%, but I'm telling you, I have a couple of agents down and Crystalline being one of them in Louisville, and that's how they do it.
Hmm.
It doesn't work in Northern Kentucky and it will not work in Northern Kentucky and it will not work in Ohio. And that's the only place I know other than in California, maybe in San Diego, they do it that way too. In Los Angeles, they don't. You have to have the actual date. So it's really interesting from different MLSs what they will accept and what they put into their contracts, which I don't even know if it's legal to tell you the truth. Like you, Brandy, I don't get it either. But who am I to say? I'm not the attorneys who wrote that contract. I'm also not the attorney who wrote this contract because it would not look like this if I had anything to do with it. Because I think
Yeah,
this is
this is
one of the worst contracts I've ever
it
read.
is. It's excessive.
What?
It's excessive, this contract.
It's excessive and a lot of it just doesn't make any sense. When you get
Mhm.
into those inspections periods and a lot of this language in here to me, and I'm being recorded, oh God, just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But it's what it is, it's what we live with, and it's what we're going to teach, and it's what we're going to do. So your date of closing should actually be a real date here. It has to be a real date. You're right, in Louisville, it's different. In Northern Kentucky, it's just like it is here, an actual date. Possession and make the deed payable or make the deed to, and you're actually going to put the people that are purchasing here, and the deed is going to be made trying to pay people money. You're going to make the deed to whoever is purchasing the property and they want to go onto the deed. It could be a trust, it could be an LLC. So whoever that is going to be that's where it will go. 477 is possession and occupancy, subject to rights of tenants shall be given at closing or not a closing on or before such and such a date at such and such a time. It also goes on to say here that until the actual possession is taken, the property will be delivered in the same condition that the buyer saw it, okay? And they will be doing another walkthrough. 25, agency disclosures. You guys be careful with your agency disclosures. Make sure that's one of the first things you get signed, especially in Kentucky. Especially in Kentucky. Make sure that you get that agency disclosure signed right up front so that they know who's being represented and how they're being represented. Company specific provisions, we charge a fee for our transaction fee. That's where that would go. There would be a good place for it to go. 496, section 27, MLS and public record acknowledgement. This is going to be reported to the multiple listing service so that it can be used for a comp later. 28 says this is the sole contract that we don't have any side deals. People make side deals. They don't stand up. They will not. Sometimes they will hold up in a court of law, and sometimes they get really ugly. So if it's not in writing, you guys, we learn the statute of frauds through school, but sometimes if it's not in writing, it can still hold up. But we're stating here that this is our only contract and that we're not putting anything else out there for them. We're not making any promises other than what's in this contract. This is just general terms, and it goes into N29. The contract shall be interpreted and construed in accordance with the laws of the state of Ohio. Any and all seller certifications, representations, and or warranties contained herein shall survive the actual date of closing for a period of 1 year. If any provision of this agreement shall be deemed unenforceable by a court of law, this agreement shall be deemed modified only to the extent of such enforceable provision, and the remainder of the agreement shall remain in full force and effect. Seller non-foreign status. Section 1445 of the IRS code provides that a transferee of a U.S. real property interest must, under certain circumstances, withhold tax if the transferee is a foreign person. I've really never had that experience here. I had it in California. But here I've never really experienced it, but that's going to come down to title, dealing with that with the IRS and maybe their attorneys. Electronic signatures, as we know, are perfectly acceptable in most instances. Every now and then, if you're selling a HUD house, they may want actual written signatures in ink. What signatures? So just keep that in mind. Indemnity. This is a hold harmless for everyone involved in this transaction. It states here that they're holding us, the agents, the brokerages, or anybody that worked with us, harmless from anything that happens with this contract. They're signing off on it here, but guess what? They can still come back and sue you. And they will, if they want to try to get some money. There is a lot of electronic and wire fraud. There's a lot of fraud going on, period, right now. And be careful in Kentucky, especially Crystalline, and also in Ohio in the rural areas. A lot of land deals are bogus right now. People are coming out of the woodwork and saying, oh yeah, that's my land, I want to sell it. And everything proves out almost 100%. And we had a deal in Kentucky that almost closed. It was a day away from closing to find out that the buyer was not the buyer, the seller was not the seller. The buyer was the buyer. The seller, though, was just, it was fraud. They had stolen someone's identity in Kentucky, in Burlington, in rural Burlington, Kentucky. It's like, is this really happening? And thank goodness that our agent had the seller and just knew it wasn't right. She had that gut feeling. When you get that gut feeling, you guys usually run from the deal, or at least totally investigate it, because it's usually going to go awry. Contract acceptance date will be the shall be defined as the date on which all provisions of the contract have been accepted and agreed by all parties. That's after you've gone back and forth on all your negotiations. and that the document reflecting the final signatures of acceptance have been physically delivered to the other party, which is a contract acceptance date. Contract performance dates and contingencies in the contract shall commence the day following the contract acceptance date. Now, and this is where you are going to put your expiration date of the offer, so that you're going to live by that. So if I'm writing this offer tonight, and I want a response by, say, 10 o'clock tomorrow night, I'm going to put that in here. And at that time, this contract dies if I don't get a response. And the buyer is certifying that they're signing, they have the full authority to sign and to purchase the contract. And the seller will also say the same thing right here in section 38. And once you get into line 568, where the seller finally accepts this or does not accept it, rejects it, counter offers it, that's where all that goes. Now, all of this needs to be filled in, and when you get down here to where the contract acceptance date, delivery of final signatures, fill this in and make sure that whoever is the one who's the final accepting realtor, either if it's you, date and time it, send it back to the other agent. If they are the ones accepting finally, then they will be the ones who send it back to you. Also, the receipt of earnest money, you will put that here once the earnest money is actually received by our office. If it's coming in digitally, you will get a receipt that it's been received, and that's what you're going to put in here. If you're getting a check, you'll put that you've received the check and the check number. And you're going to sign off on that the money has been received. And then this is just administrative stuff on the bottom here. Names, the lender, etc., that they will have all of your information so that they can get in touch with you if they need to, and also the seller's form. So that is it. We got all the way through the contract. Can you believe it? It was pretty fast. So that means that there's a lot of things in here you are not going to have read. You're not going to understand, and you need to read this. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm here for you. And you will have questions as you're starting to write your offers. And I hope you write tons and tons. I hope you write 10 in the next month. So you are so used to this contract, you know exactly what it says. Now, what kind of questions can I answer for you?
When do we, so I know this contracts to purchase, when do we do the seller's agreement?
The seller's agreement is coming up. Are you getting ready to list something?
I am.
Okay. Are you working with anybody at the office?
She's not necessarily there. She's at Columbia Parkway.
Who are you working with?
Brittany Williams.
Okay. I would defer to her. Is she experienced?
She is.
Okay. I would defer to her to help you, but if you want to, if that happens and you want me to check the seller's agreement before you do it, please feel free to send it to me and I'll take a minute to go over it with you.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm not sure exactly when that is coming up. It will show up on the calendar, just like this one did today. I just don't have the date. I'm sorry. And I
That's
can't
okay.
really access it here just yet. But I would say to you, go in there, read that contract, read the exclusive right to sell. It's not nearly as complicated as this,
Mhm.
but you do need to know what it says. Read it 3 times. I always say if you read something 3 times, you're probably going to get the gist of what it's trying to say to you. And if you
Okay.
have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. You're always welcome to reach out to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I'll try to answer those questions if you have any. It's much more self-explanatory than this. This is really, I think, a complicated contract. I think it delves into a lot of things that you really need to be very careful when you're writing it. And you will need help probably as you write this for the first 10 times, I would say.
Okay.
All the people that I've coached through this contract, I have them send it to me probably 10 times, their first 10 deals, to make sure that there's nothing in here that's going to come back and not be okay. So we want to make sure that you are writing a contract that's valid and effective and is not going to get anyone in any trouble at any given time.
Okay.
Any other questions on this? Any comments? Any fear? Anything you got feelings about it? I'd love to hear from you. No, you
No, I
guys.
think it was, no, I think it was good. I don't have any hesitations about it.
Okay,
Just
good.
a
Well,
good
you've
review
been,
for me.
yeah, you've been with me a few times, so, right? Crystal,
No,
and or was that
not
April?
me.
Oh,
No.
okay, that was
Yeah.
April. Okay.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, I've come in. It's just always good to refresh because it is kind of confusing.
It is, and the fact that you're in two different MLSs and
Uh-huh.
working two different areas. I have three, because I do California, Ohio, and Kentucky, and they are all quite different, especially California. That contract's about 30 pages long, but here's the beauty of it. There's nothing left to chance. Everything is explained. When we come to Cincinnati, everything is kind of nebulous in certain areas, not everything, but like the inspection section is kind of up for grabs a lot of times, and the earnest money and insurance, those are the areas that I really have in the financing, to tell you the truth, the way it's written. So be very, very careful when you're writing this offers to make sure that you're very clear with your buyers exactly what they're signing so that it doesn't come back and haunt us later. But
What's the
they're all
standard time?
different. I'm
What's the
sorry, what'd you
standard?
say, April?
Yeah, I'm sorry. What's the
That's
standard time that you give people to like respond to a contract? I'm always aggressive, so just curious as to what time frame you use.
You're a girl after my own heart. I'm always aggressive because I want to get it accepted.
Right.
So I mean, I will call the agent and start making nice with them and asking the right questions prior to writing the offer. Sometimes I may give them 3 hours, but I will ask them if it's going to be a really short time frame. Can you get back to me? For example, I sold a house a few months ago that I wanted accepted that night because I knew that if it made it to the next day, that it was going to go into multiples. So I
Mm-hmm.
said to her, what do I have to do tonight to get this offer accepted by 10 o'clock? It was 7.
Okay.
And
Okay.
she said, oh, I don't know exactly. I said, well, I'm going to write you the best offer that I can. This is what it's going to look like, but I want it back by 10. Can you do that? And she said, yes. So
Mm.
we went pending that night. Guess what happened the
Okay.
next day? It was still showing,
Yeah.
and they did go into multiples in backups because we had the accepted offer. So
Right.
I'm as aggressive as I possibly can be when I'm writing those offers. I usually do it though in a nice way and
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
April, I really want to do this deal with you, but I want to make it easy for you and your sellers. So what is it that's most important to them that I can write in this tonight to get it accepted as soon as we can?
Okay. Yeah. I like that language. Yeah, I usually want everything and everybody to be happy. I don't like going to the table and everybody, and nobody's happy or the
No, we
seller's
don't
not
want
happy.
that.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
and
That's good language to use. Thank you.
yeah, you're so welcome. But the sooner we can get it accepted, the better chance we have of getting it accepted, right?
Right.
So I just don't
Exactly.
want to leave it out there for 48 hours. Now, sometimes you're going to have to. Sometimes they're going to say, we're not even looking at the offers for 48 hours.
Right.
But then I would say to them, well, is there any situation that might change their minds?
Okay. Okay.
And is there something that I could go ahead and write that offer now that would go ahead and put us in a position that we could get it accepted sooner so that we don't have to go through the 48 hours? Because a lot of people will, they'll say we're not looking at offers for 48 hours, then the next day goes pending, right? I mean, then
Yeah.
we've all
Yeah.
seen that happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
but it starts with communicating with that listing agent, letting them know that you know what you're doing, right? Asking the right questions and
Yeah.
trying to work with them from the very beginning to let them know you're going to be a really good person for them to work with.
So with that, you said communicating with them. What is your advice on dealing with agents that don't answer their phones, that
Ugh,
are not responsive?
it's a
Um,
problem. They don't want to talk to you and they're not going to answer. You're going to run into those people and there's not a daggone thing you can do about it. I try to kill them with kindness from the very get-go. That way they might work with me easier. But if
uh-huh.
they're just not answering, I just go in with the best that I can and do the best I can.
Okay, all right,
You know, sometimes they're
Wow.
just not going to be very viable to work with.
right. All right, thank you.
My gosh, you're so welcome. Guys, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it so much. And I hope that you write offers tomorrow and the day after, and you have to call me and I can help you. And Crystalline, it's always good to see you. Thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye.
I
Appreciate you doing
appreciate
this.
you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Susan. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Susan.
Thank you. Have a great night. Questions,
too.
just reach out to me. It's Susan Ash at kw.com, ASCH. Send me an email, okay?
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you,
Thanks.
guys. Have a great night.
Too.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
And it normally is during the mornings, but people don't show up. So I said, you know what? I'll do one in the evening. And guess what?